That's because, dear students, welcome. Today I am going to deliver what probably is my hardest lecture of this semester. And that honor goes to Hegel because today we're leaving behind the more, well, not actually an historical approach, but last time was about, real life events and discussions. Today we are returning to philosophy, to real philosophy, deep philosophy, hard philosophy, philosophy of people like Kant and, of course, Hegel. So please get into your diving gear so we can go into the deep today. And let's start with some context, right? Before we get into this. So Hegel, Wikipedia will tell you, is German, but the problem is that Germany didn't actually exist back then. He was from somewhere inside Germany. But Germany was a mess of overlapping feudal entities. I told you before that in feudalism you had the fragmented power, right? Well, this map is how that looks like. This is fragmented, right? Each different color is a different political unit on this map. And that only was united in the sense that you had a king or emperor that ruled all of it, but only in theory. He didn't hold power over all these entities, and they were not united in a single state. Let's say it was just a single head of state, but all the politics was local. So Germany was still feudal. This is a map of the year of the French Revolution. And Germany was still not a centralized state. It was one of the last countries in Europe to drop feudalism. And the only thing that really kept them together, that made this Germany, is that they spoke German. And the only thing that really kept us together was cultural unity. They had the same songs and poetry and etc., things like that. But there was no strong German state. And this is an environment in which Hegel will grow up, and you will see that he really stresses culture as kind of the binding force of people, of history. Ms. Asbrick, no. Prussia is the north of Germany. So Prussia is a feudal unit within Germany, and it was the strongest state. So sometimes Prussia conquered other parts, and that made it stronger, or sometimes the king of Germany, of the empire, happened to be from Prussia. Actually, that was often the case. But Prussia itself is a smaller entity. Prussia is northern Germany. But the borders change over time, right? But the core of it is always in the north. It was a city state. It's like the Sparta of Germany. It focused very strongly on its army, and that's why it was powerful. So, Hegel. When we talk about Hegel, we always use his last name, right? But there is more to that, really. He is Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, GWF Hegel. And he lived from 1770 to 1831, which means he only got 61 years old. And he did live through the French Revolution, right? He saw that happen. It made a deep impression on him. But his life story in itself is not particularly exciting. So he got born in Stuttgart, which again is not a particularly interesting city in Germany, somewhere in the middle. While the French Revolution was starting, he didn't join the fight. No, he went to church school. Instead, he studied theology at the university, right? He studied religion. But after that, he did all kind of small jobs, usually tutoring. Of rich people's children. And finally, in 1816, he landed his first professorship in philosophy of religion, at the University of Heidelberg, which is a very nice place. But unfortunately, then he had to move to Berlin and become professor of philosophy there. And it's in this capacity that we learn about him. Now, Hegel actually never really wrote books. all the books that we know of Hegel, and he has lots of books, are his lectures. So it would be like you take my course and then you take all PowerPoints and then you put them together and put a title on it. That's kind of what his books are. So his books are really written by his students rather than written by him. Well, he did write things, but his main works are really notes from his lectures. And there's many he wrote. Hegel is a true heavyweight philosopher, right? He's on the level of Aristotle. He or Kant. He really wrote about everything. So there's so much more to it than what I'm telling you today. Today I'm telling you 1%, let's say, of his work. I'm focusing more on his work on history here. That's the last title. So he wrote about the phenomenology of the spirit, the science of logic, an encyclopedia of philosophical sciences and all these things. And he wrote Verschlegungen über die Philosophie der Geschichte, or the report on the philosophy of history. And that's what we'll mainly be talking about. So as I said, if you Hegel, if you ever heard of him, probably the first thing you've heard of him is that he's difficult, right? And that you might not understand this philosophy. So I'm going to approach him quite slowly. I'm first going to circle around, let's say, the pool that is Hegel. And then we're going to dive in when you're ready to do so. So I'm first going to describe his type of thinking before I'm going to actually expose you to it. So Hegelian philosophy, right? What can we say about it? What makes it stand apart? But one thing that makes it stand apart, dear students, is that it's focused on synthesis. Synthesis means that you're going to take a bunch of elements together, a bunch of theories, a bunch of phenomena together, and from their combination, you're going to distill a certain truth. You're going to reach your conclusion by zooming out, let's say, and looking at the whole. It's the opposite of analysis. In analysis, you're zooming in, you're dissecting. You're pulling the thing you're studying apart, right? Like this pen, I would then take this part off and take this part off, and I would look at it from closer. That means I'm analyzing the pen. But synthesis is not that. Synthesis is reaching conclusions to combination. Science these days doesn't focus much on synthesis. I myself really appreciate synthesis. I appreciate people who can look at everything we know about something and come to new truths from that. Not necessarily just break it down into smaller and smaller things. So his focus is on the big picture. And with that comes that he is also a holistic thinker. Now, holism is the worldview that you have to look at things as a whole, right? Holism, whole. That's not literally what it means, but holism is the idea that the sum is more than that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. It means that we cannot just look at the different elements of a phenomena. We need to see how they work together, right? Just like a mouse is not just chemistry. I explained that the other day, right? The fact that it's alive does not just follow from the chemical properties of any element in it. Life is not a chemical property, right? It's only through the combination of all these things that somehow this thing reaches a whole new level of reality, right? And lives. So the whole is more than the sum of its parts. If you take the mouse apart and put it back together, it's not a mouse anymore. Yes. Same with the wheel. A wheel, if you would take a wooden wheel, if you take it apart into different pieces, none of these pieces can roll, right? They would just fall if you would throw them down a hill. Only as a whole does it gain the ability to roll. So you have to look at things in their, let's say, most complete form to analyze them. We need to look, if, for example, a holistic way of thinking is ecology. If you look at all our individual actions that emit carbon dioxide, All of them look innocent, right? Oh, what difference does it make if I eat meat? What difference does it make if I travel, etc., etc.? Only if we zoom out and we see that everybody's doing this, and we look at the effect of all of this together, we can see the disaster. So he sees reality as linked. Everything is linked to something else. Thirdly, Hegel is a historical thinker. Remember that last week I talked about what was new in this module, is this perspective of history, right? Well, that is largely thanks to Hegel as a person. Everything he did was historical. All of his books are written in a historical narrative sense, is that he starts with the past and then he builds his way up to the present. That's what he does every single time. He is very strongly focused on the historical process of things, on how things evolve. Even when he's talking about philosophy or logic, he will do that. And that, although he's super abstract, that gives his work some sense of realism. Because he will say, no, I'm not abstract at all. I'm only talking about things in their historical context. I'm never talking about things just as the idea of it, right? Like Plato would do, for example. I'm always talking in historical context. And that means that you can actually learn a lot about history by reading Hegel. He did know for his time what he was talking about, roughly. And he did do the research, right? If you compare to social contract philosophy, these people just assumed things about the past. Very big assumptions. Hegel didn't do that, right? He paid attention to it. And fourthly, Hegel is very vague. Hegel is vague in his wording, and it is hard to understand. But also, he doesn't really offer much concrete conclusions of what we should do, or he doesn't have a program of action. Well, he does, but it's useless. So we shouldn't take him too literal in many things he says. Right? Mainly, Hegel is of inspirational value. What he taught of politics is almost irrelevant. He thought nothing spectacular. He kind of argued for things the way they were. What his main role is in the history of political thought is how he inspired other people. So my claim today is that his exact points on politics are not relevant, and I'm going to spend maybe 1 minute on them. What I want you to take from this lecture, what I want you to understand, is the beauty of his ideas. If you are willing to give up your sleepiness and actually listen to me today, you can learn some really beautiful truths about life from Hegel. And also, you can see that he is very prophetic. Hegel talks about things that only now we start to understand. So that's what we're going to get from this lecture. So let us dive in, dear students. Unless you already have questions that you want to throw at me. But if not, I'm going to start with the most difficult part of all of this. The hardest thing to understand about Hegel is to understand his way of thinking, his method, how he argues for things. And that's called the dialectical method. Now, I only half understand this myself, and so do almost all people, but I'm going to explain to you as good as I can. I'm first going to explain to you in abstract, just words, and then I'm going to give you a more elaborate example of this. So hold on for that. But if you don't understand it, it's okay. Let's keep trying. So, dialectics. Where does that word come from? The word dialectics, dear Anna Laura, comes from dialogue, right? And dialogue, a dialogue is not just any conversation. Not any form of communication between people is a dialogue. If I give you orders to do something, that is not a dialogue, right? Even if we talk to each other, it not necessarily is a dialogue. A dialogue is a form of communication where we allow each other to be influenced by each other, and when we stick to a certain subject and we exchange views, right? So I say something, a certain claim about politics, like I do every day you see me. And you, if we were actually one-on-one, you're going to take in what I'm saying and you're going to formulate a response, right? When I asked you yesterday what you thought about violence, okay, you're going to take my opinion, but you're not literally going to agree with me. Even if you agree with me, you're not going to 100% reproduce what I'm saying, right? So what you say back to me is based on what I first said, but it is different. Maybe you disagree with me, right? But you still have to address what I first said. So what you're going to say next is going to be about what I first said, but it's going to be different. It's going to be a different reaction to it. Then I again take in what you say. I'm going to mix it with what I'm thinking, and I'm going to reply to that. And if we have a good dialogue, each reply is going to be smarter than the previous one, because we're both learning and correcting each other in a dialogue. We're going, in other words, Miss Annette, we're going back and forth towards the truth, right? Things are getting better in a dialogue. Now, Hegel applies this to philosophy. He says that the progress of ideas, right, progress of truth, emerges from contradictory processes that react to and transition into each other. It means that you have an idea, that idea has certain problems with it, right? It's not a perfect idea. That is going to trigger reactions of other ideas, which then again will trigger reactions of other ideas, and each idea is replying to the last one. So it's bouncing from one to the other, but always getting better. At least that's how he thinks it works. Now, this is not a causal process. It is not that one idea causes the other one or determines the other one, right? Because in between them is our consciousness, right? It doesn't just bounce. It's not like when I say a statement, it's not like it's a bullet that just penetrates your brain and pam, you believe what I said. Your consciousness filters that, and then it's interactive. But still, you have to reply to the previous thing. So he thinks that ideas evolve in a certain rhythm. Yeah, just like so. Before we get to ideas, so for example, dialectical process would be I like my colleague from FIME starts scolding you, and then you get sad and you start crying. So my scolding is a thesis. This is the first premise. You start crying because of that. That's your reaction to it, and I calm down because of your crying, and I say, oh well, it's not that bad, but next time pay more attention. Right, that would be then the resolution. So things kind of transition into each other, and it has a rhythm. The rhythm is that you go through cycles of thesis. That's an idea. All people in pre are corrupt, right? You have an antithesis that is the reaction to that idea. You, whose father works for the pre, says, no, there are no corrupt people in the pre. Which obviously is a problematic statement. And then you have a synthesis, which kind of resolves a tension between the two. Okay, most people in pre are corrupt, but not all, right? So you have thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Action, reaction, resolution. And he thinks that the history of ideas typically goes through this rhythm, goes through cycles of this. Or, well, they don't necessarily reach synthesis. You could just have thesis, antithesis, thesis, antithesis, thesis, antithesis forever if you cannot solve the problem. But when you do resolve it, you reach synthesis. I'm going to give you a real example of this soon. But anyway, the point here is that the driving force of the history of ideas, of progress, of his philosophy, is contradiction. He's going to take a proposition, he's going to look if there are any inherent problems with it. Then he's going to try to address those with the new proposition, right? That will have problems again, etc., etc. So we're constantly contradicting what we're saying. And this process is both destructive and so what Suzanne says is like making you think more deeply about your idea to polish it. It's more that you observe how ideas go around and how things react to each other. Yeah, but dialogue does point out the weakness of your ideas. Yeah. Or you would have a conversation with yourself. You could also do that. Yes, it's sort of in that direction. So this is both destructive and constructive. It's destructive because it's always changing, right? You cannot just reach a simple conclusion because then Hegel is going to come and say, yeah, but what about that, right? You know, oh my God. But at the same time, it's also constructive because there is a movement in this, right? It gets better over time. The dialectics of history get better. Our understanding increases. It's an upward spiral. We leave behind constantly bad ideas in our understanding. So that goes through different phases, right? And in each moment, your idea is the best possible idea, but it's never finished. So let me give you an example, an actual historical example, like Hegel would want it. That I invented, by the way. I don't know if it's going to work. So let's talk about things that we've talked about so far in the course. So at some point we were with divine right, if you remember that. We had the theory of absolute monarchy. And absolute monarchy consists of two components, absolute and monarchy, right? The monarchy part is that the king rules the people. And the absolute part is that the king can do anything in his rule of the people, right? This is not the best idea, right? You basically have a tyrant. So we innovated against that. You had people like Locke, right? Who said, well, maybe the king can do anything part is a bit problematic. So we're going to have a constitutional monarchy. Now the king is still ruling the people, but the king is restricted by laws in ruling the people. So this is the antithesis to my first thesis, right? It changed a problematic element in it. Constitutional monarchy is still very problematic because A, the king is still ruling, and B, these laws were not made by the people, right? They're made by the king or by natural law or any of these things the elite invents to control people. So for you as a peasant, your life is exactly the same in the first scenario, except that the king cannot come and claim your wife on wedding night or something stupid like that. But life is still the same. So the French Revolution happens, and now we change everything, right? It's a revolution. It's a strong antithesis to this. So we get rid of the king. Now the people rule themselves, and we get rid of these stupid laws. So now the people can do anything in their self-rule. This is Jacobism. So this is my man Robespierre. But as some people point out, Robespierre was quite murderous. This can do anything part, they really filled it into the max, right? This can do anything part. So that's also a bit problematic. So we need the resolution of this idea. And then we reach constitutional monarchy, which is the synthesis of this evolution of ideas, where we both resolve both problematic arguments. So now the people are restricted by laws in their self-rule, right? That would be the synthesis of our discussion, because we resolved the tensions within it. Until communism happens, then we'll point out that this is also fake, but we're not there yet in the course, right? Until now, this is the best thing we know, right? This is our synthesis. I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Marcos. I'm sorry. I'm a peasant, I'm from a very small town. I don't know all these difficult words, but I do know about Hegel. So let me continue. Right, this is dialectical thinking. I hope you have a sense of what I'm talking about. So with this behind us, let's get to actually difficult things. This is the big slide. This is the one that we're going to be stuck on for a while. So let me explain. Let's light our blunts and get to some real deep stuff. Mr. Marcos, let's take you. I want you to look deep into yourself while you're lighting your blunt and think of everything you know, right? Try to visualize it like a mind map. You will agree with me that most of the things you know, you didn't invent. Some of those things you might have figured out on your own, but a lot of the things that you know are things that you either read somewhere or that somebody else told you, right? And I think, unless one of you was raised by wolves, that is true, right? For example, many things you might know about the history of political thought, I told you, right? So a lot of the things we know, of our thoughts, of our ideas, come from the past. They were passed on to us, right? Now we are not just literally reproducing these ideas, right? The things I tell you, even if I try to manipulate you, it's never going to be fully successful. You're not going to take everything I say, but you're going to think some things I say. And maybe that passes on, right? Maybe you tell some of the things you learned at this faculty to other people later on, right? Or maybe you teach things to your children. Maybe not what I'm telling you, but there's certain things you're going to learn from your parents that you will then pass on to your children. Now the point here is that these ideas, right? They kind of have a life of their own. They travel through us, right? We change them. We don't just literally reproduce them like a phone reproduces, like an antenna reproduces signal. We modify them a bit with our own experiences, but they pass on nonetheless. And they pass on also when we die, right? So I tell you something, you tell somebody else something, and then we both die of COVID. The thing I first told you is going to keep going, even if I'm dead, right? If it's an interesting thing. So if you look at it, if you look at my little images there, right? Let's say we're the middle generation. Let's say we're the middle group of people. We're going to receive ideas from the previous generation. We're going to chew on them. We're going to mix them with our own experiences, but we're also going to pass them on, and then we die, right? But these ideas, they keep going. They kind of live through us, yeah? Now this collection of ideas, right? This culture that we have at some point is what Hegel is going to call the spirit. So our thoughts are part and contribute to a bigger civilization, yes? And one such instance, one such group of people and their thoughts is called the spirit. So the spirit is a development and realization of the potential and ideas of a system of individuals. In other words, of a certain society, of a certain community, of a certain generation. So the spirit of your generation, and you can take that literal, right? The spirit of Generation Z, right, is a development and realization of ideas of a certain culture at a certain time. So you have certain ideas, some of them passed on by my generation, some of them that you invented your own, and you're going to try to perfect them, and you're going to try to also realize them, put them into practice, right? And that is the spirit. So it is, let's say, the collective consciousness, in a way, of a certain system of individuals. Easiest to understand as a country, right? A country at a particular moment in time. So you could think of it as the spirit of the times, right? Mexico right now has certain thoughts, has certain spirit that it didn't have 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago, the spirit was neoliberalism, if you talk about politics. Now, it is anti-corruption. That's what a lot of talk is about these days, right? But it's also maybe feminism, right? This is the spirit of a time. And this we pass on, and it transforms, etc., from generation to generation. When this is within a certain community, within a certain country, right? Mexico has a spirit. Whatever ideas are popping right now, whatever ideas, whatever transformation, political transformation we're going through. But humanity as a whole also has something like this. What Hegel calls the absolute spirit. The absolute spirit is the big picture. The absolute spirit is a realization of the collective potential of human civilization. These are all our thoughts. This is basically, what did humans learn after so many years of evolution, right? What is the pinnacle of our civilization? What's the best artistic ideas we have? What's the best scientific ideas what we have? What's the best political ideas that we have at a given point? And these are going to be different ideas, right? And some ideas might develop in one country, but then they're going to start interacting with other countries, right? AMLO might come up with a sort of program, for example, Sembrado Vida, or Jóvenes Construyendo Futuro, and maybe other countries start copying that, right? They do, actually. So these ideas globally, right, they start mixing too. And that, the realization of this, is what we call the absolute spirit. So now we're talking very big ideas, right? The absolute spirit of the world, what's that about? It's about, I don't know, human rights, democracy. These are the big ideas, free market in our case, right? These are the big ideas that are driving the world now. That's the absolute spirit. This is human civilization itself, right? The collective consciousness of humanity, which we are not conscious of, right? Because we don't know all these as one, because we're from a particular place. We don't know all of it, but it does kind of create, like, you looking from space, you can look, okay, humans are learning this and this and this, right? That's the absolute spirit. Now, this sounds very spiritual, and you can take it like that, right? Spirit as in the mind, but it is not invisible. These ideas, they materially manifest itself in institutions, right? Our best ideas on norms, for example, manifest themselves in laws, right? We do try to make this real, this spirit. The spirit wants to realize itself, right? It wants to see change. The spirit of feminism wants to seek legal change, wants to seek effects in reality, right? So if you look at how society is organized, how its institutions work, what laws it has, you can kind of see out of which spirit this was born, right? You can say, yeah, but everything is corrupt. That's because our spirit is prismo, right? That our institutions are currently based on. Now, this process of passing on ideas, of trying to realize these ideas, this has a direction. Human civilization, Hegel says, is not a random process. It's neither cyclical, not going in circles, as people thought, right? It's not like we're cycling to the same 6 ideas over and over again. No, the spirit is not a belief system. It's not a religion. The spirit is a spirit of the times. It is zeitgeist. How do you say this in English? It is culture, belief system. It is the best of culture, let's say. So this process, this cultural evolution, let me call it like that, this has a direction. This is going somewhere. And Hegel is innovative, right? He says, if you look at human history, we are evolving in one direction. Steps forwards and steps backwards are made. Horrible things happen, but the real direction is towards greater consciousness. That's the true story of humanity, of human civilization, is that we're always becoming more conscious. Conscious about nature, we call this science. Conscious about ourselves, we call this religion or psychology. And become more conscious of institutions, we call this politics. So there is a point to history, right? History has a direction. And this idea that the history has a direction and that follows the evolution of civilization, this feeds into what we would call idealism. Idealism, you must read it as idealism, not idealism, because it's not about ideals. The L kind of should not be in this word. It's not about ideals. It's not about making something the best. It's about ideas. Idealism means it's Hegel's belief that the development of the spirit is a driving force of history. That history of the world primarily is a history of ideas. So all kind of drama happens, right? People kill each other, people cheat on each other, people divorce. This happens all the time. There's all this little drama going on throughout humanity. And that is kind of cyclical because we keep doing the same stupid stuff. But he says, that this doesn't matter, right? Empires are going to fall, empires are going to rise, whatever. What's really interesting, what's really driving history is not this drama, it's the evolution of ideas. Is the evolution of science, of technology, of politics, right? That's the real red thread throughout human history, is that our ideas evolve. People are gonna die, empires are gonna fall, but we're gonna learn from each step, right? We are today further than we were in the past. That's not because we changed, that's because our ideas changed. So the most important thing in history are ideas. This is fundamental to Hegel's worldview. And this evolution of history, of the spirit, is dialectical. It moves forward to contrary processes that react to and transition to each other, through which change emerges. As the example I gave you, right, of the king and then the rule by the law, the rule by the people ruled by the law. It's a dialectical process. We try out certain ideas, they're going to fail, we're going to learn from that. We're going to try the opposite, it's also going to fail. And, each attempt is either better or leading us closer to the truth. Or not. Sometimes we do things that are irrelevant to the human history, right? Some ideas are just stupid, like current COVID with chloride dioxide, right? That's not going to have a place in history. So dialectic is a selective process. Not everything in history, not every idea somebody has is part of the absolute spirit. It's part of the world spirit, right? It only includes the parts that help us evolve our thinking. So it doesn't include everything. It's a selective process. We do make massive mistakes in history. Hegel is not saying that history is one giant success. No. There's lots of failure, but something survives in this. And this has a destiny. Hegel says, the history of the world is nothing else than the development of the awareness of freedom. This is the fundamental point. What we learned throughout history, if you have to make a mega synthesis, the evolution of history is the realization of the idea that we are equal and that we are free. This is what the course has been about so far, in a sense, right? You first had this old despotic times where you just had a god king, like Egyptian times, and people like, oh, the god king, and everybody were slaves. Then in Greek times, people started realizing, okay, we are free. We can self-organize. But they didn't understand the equal part, right? Because only, native Greek men of middle class were so-called free. Everybody else, women, slaves, foreigners, they were not the people. So it takes us a lot of time to understand who the people really are, right? With Christianity, we make a big leap forward. Yes, Christ comes with the idea that we're all equal, that we're all children of God. This is a big thing, right? But Christ, if you remember, was not, okay, I'm summarizing like thousands of pages here in a minute, so it's going to fail, but I'm just trying to illustrate it, right? So you could say that Christ, he didn't involve himself in politics, so it didn't have any real life consequences. It just told people that they were worthy and equal, except that was not what was happening, because we were living in the Roman Empire, right? So there was there was only freedom on the inside and on the outside. And then with the French Revolution, then a lot of stuff happens. And then at the French Revolution, let's say this all comes together, right? You get equality and freedom. And that has new problems and blah, 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 blah. So history of the world is nothing else than development of the awareness of freedom. Drake likes that quote. Now, this is all very vague, right? So let's talk about the consequences of this, right? Why does any of this matter? What are the implications of these nice stories that I've been telling you? Let's start with politics. The political implication of this idea of the spirit is that since history is made of contradictory ideas, history is not going to be stable nor cyclical, right? History will include breaks. We're going to try ideas that at some point are going to burst. At some point, it's going to fail. There are going to be ruptures when one type of thinking is so exhausted that we have to come with something else. For example, the French Revolution, right? This whole absolute monarchy idea was so decadent and old that at one day it had to fall. So history comes with ruptures, and that's normal. There are going to be transformations. Another consequence of this is that if histories have changed, right, then we're never really there. So how things are today are different from the spirit. What do I mean by this? What we are thinking and how the country is are two different things, right? The institutions, they have to adapt to the spirit of the times, to the best ideas, to the zeitgeist. But they are not that. There's a gap between them. There's a certain lag between what we want and what is happening, right? We're trying to get to realize our ideas of each generation, but that doesn't happen instantly, right? We live in a world that's always imperfect compared to where we are heading in culture, right? That only the world means the state, has to slowly adapt reality to what's in our mind. Yes. And that is the realm of politics, Hegel would say. This is where politics takes place. Politics is about understanding the spirit, understanding the culture, and making changes, right? Mexico doesn't want corruption. Corruption didn't instantly stop, but we are making changes. For example, we made corruption a grave crime. That's step forward. We're actually trying people in court, right? We're extraditing people, etc. So we're heading in that direction, but we're not there yet. And maybe we'll never reach it. Maybe this project fails. Yes. But this is Hegel's concept of politics, right? So Hegel encourages you, mister, to reshape society to your ideals. This is the real role of the citizen, of the politician, to try to understand our ideas, try to come up with the best idea we can, and then change the institutions. Because otherwise it won't materialize, right? So Hegel wants us to reshape our environment to match our ideals. That's what you should be doing. The last consequence of this is that the spirit is the collective culture of a certain community, right? Not the world, that's the world spirit, that's a different thing. So this evolution is mainly national. Hegel is a nationalist. So he's thinking of the spirit of Germany, right? What are all the ideas? Well, where's Germany heading? Where's German culture heading? He says it's heading towards unity. Right? That's what he wants to see. He wants Germany to become more unified and try to change the image of the German state to match, let's say, the culture of Germany. In other words, become more united. That's kind of his political agenda here. So this is primarily a national philosophy, right? It's about your culture and matching your state to match what the people in that culture are thinking or feeling. So Hegel is not interested in things like a social contract, because that makes no sense to him, right? It's a very abstract thing of, oh, let's agree to do this. No, we're already somewhere, we're already in a nation, we're already in a community. He's only interested in the evolution of institutions towards a better incarnation of the spirit. We'll get to more concrete political implications later, but these are the consequences for his political thought. Now let us pause and get to... Wait, let me pause first and ask, do you understand me somewhat?
Yes.
Some person did. Okay.
Yes, teacher.
2 persons did. Great, maybe 3. If you don't,
So
it's
far, so good.
okay. This is difficult stuff. Now let's talk to about my favorite part, the ethical implications. Here I truly love Hegel for what I'm about to tell you. So if we're in a system, right, in which we are passing, basically the most important thing that we do is passing on ideas and trying to realize them, right? That's what history is about. That's what the world is about. That's what life is about. That's what humanity is about pushing human civilization, yeah, towards ever greater perfection, towards ever greater realization of freedom and consciousness. That's, let's say, the mission of humanity, right? We're this driving consciousness. That is true. And it's also true that we die, and I think it is true, right? Then what really matters? Well, Hegel will say that our moral worth is related to a contribution to the progress of the world spirit. If this is really the most important thing in life, then what's the most important thing for us to do is contribute to the progress of human civilization. Because, let's now talk this a bit spiritual, right? And we get very close to what I myself believe. This would be, if I would anything close to my religious beliefs, it would be this. I am gonna die. That's a fact. And some of you believe that my spirit is gonna go to heaven. I don't. But that doesn't necessarily mean that my spirit is going to go away. Because if I understand my spirit in a Hegelian sense, is in my mind, collection of my best ideas, that I could actually pass on to my son or whoever, right? But I will die, but not necessarily my ideas. If I tell you a great idea and next moment I die, right? That part of my mind is still living. Yes. So I am mortal, but the ideas that I received, like Hegel's ideas, and that I'm passing on, are in a sense not immortal because they could end, but they live on, right? So humanity, as in civilization, is immortal, right? Or at least has no lifespan. So human civilization keeps going, the spirit keeps going, our collective consciousness keeps going, unless we all die, right? Climate change, that could kill the human civilization, that could end this great experiment of history. But our mind, our thoughts, they in a way survive us. So the meaning of life, in a sense, to get really deep, is to contribute to this, right? To contribute to the world spirit. We realize ourselves through a contribution to the realization of the whole. I realize myself to the extent that I can keep humanity going. Yes. Now that's a very beautiful idea if you truly understand what I said. So our moral duty, our moral word, is contributing to humanity, and that is going to go on, right? That's going to realize, it's going to perfect the human race. And I and you can contribute to that. And that's our true destiny. Now, if that is true, and I actually believe it's true, what is super important socially is recognition. If my moral word depends on my contribution, then my social position 100% depends on if you recognize my contribution, right? If you recognize me as a legitimate actor, and if you recognize the things I'm doing. If you don't, I kind of don't exist, right? So to give you an example of this, it took humanity a lot of time to recognize the contribution of women. Not because women were not doing things, right? Just because we didn't consider that important until some socialists and liberals at one point are like, what women are doing, It's actually pretty important, right? And at that point, we finally realized the recognition that a woman had made to the world spirit, right? And that's super important, this recognition, right? Because in a sense, you just don't matter if you're not noticed in that way. So recognition is an extremely important thing. Recognizing people for what they contribute is a big part of ethics here, right? For what they are, for what they are doing. Whether it's taking care of children, whether it's driving a bus, whether it's inventing things in a laboratory. Recognition is absolutely key. And here is visionary, because we still have a lot of political battles that are about recognition. So how do you translate this into concrete ethics, right? So Hegel wants you to do what matters. Hegel wants you to contribute, which is different from acting nice. Yeah, he wants you to both do what is right and what actually is effective. So in Hegelian ethics, being nice is useless. You could be a niña bien your whole life, right? You could be this, this typical smiley girl, right? Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? Sí, muy bien, muy bien. ¿Y tú? ¿Con la familia? Oh, sí, sí. You could be this person all your life and be a great sister, be a great daughter, be always smiley and happy and, polite to people and never do anything for humanity. You could be a selfish consumerist person that's just nice the whole time. But in Hegelian logic, that has no ethical value, right? Or you could be a grumpy person like myself. You don't know me in real life because we're not at the faculty at the same time. But when we finally meet, you will see I'm actually quite a grumpy person. When I walk around the faculty, I walk around like this, staring at the floor, thinking about politics. People are like, Maestro! I'm like, yeah. I'm not this, hola, how's your family type of person. But I do really try to contribute to civilization, right? I write, I teach, etc. So it's not important how smiley and nice you are. It's important that you do things that matter. I hope you get this, right? It's about being on the right side of history. If we would be going to some massive transformation, let's say we're finally getting rid of corruption, and you're outside Parliament with your little sign that says, free the goldfish, stop the balls, right? Like Partido Verde did. If you're there with your sign, free the goldfish, you're just outside history in a way, right? You're outside the spirit of the times. You're on the wrong side of things. You're not contributing to human civilization because really the action is elsewhere, right? So it's also about aligning yourself with the right causes at the right time. It's about what needs to happen at that time, right? So in this type of ethics, it's not about how much you smile or how nice you are. The most important thing actually is which ideas you're spreading. It matters what you say. It matters what ideas do you represent. What are you talking about? If you the next carne asada, if it ever happens, are going to meet your little cousins, right? What are you going to tell them about? That's what matters to history, right? That feeds the spirit. So these are 1% of Hegelian ethical implications, which I truly like. So what does this mean for the individual, right? Let's talk a bit about that. Let's pivot. We're going to go on a sidetrack here for a second. I need to come to my next conclusion. I first need to talk a bit about freedom. Oh, by the way, did you like what I just said? Do you think this is beautiful? You think you're like, nah, life really is about being an niña bien. It's not about contributing. Please let me know in the chat. So I need to talk a bit about freedom, because in his ethics, what Hegel is not about is about liberal individualism. He's not about this idea of Hobbes and Locke that humans should and only do follow their rational self-interest, right? You have these individuals and they're going to follow their self-interest, and that's how history happens. Hegel says this is absolute nonsense. for three reasons. He rejects this as any ethical basis for society. Like Rousseau, he's going to point out that this simply didn't happen. It's historically false, he says. He says, first of all your arguments, because he's talking to social contract philosophers here, right? He's talking to Locke, he's talking to Hobbes. He says, what you're saying, right? You come with all these theories about the state of nature as if that ever happened, right? But I, who study history, know that there is no abstract state of nature. That there is history. That something happened, but not what you're saying. There's also no natural rights. That's not how rights happened, right? Rights happened because some ruler gave them to you, and there definitely was no social contract, right? This just didn't happen. We never all came together, right? What didn't happen is that the English fell from the sky, like Mr. Bean, and were like, oh, well, let's talk about politics, shall we? Henry, come over here. Fancy creating a society? Get my signing pen. I think we should sign this social contract and FT afterwards. Shall we? This never happened, right? This is not a moment in history, Hegel says. So he said, so shut up, you guys. And plus, there is no such thing as your individuality and your rational thinking outside this historical process. You were not born in the desert, right? You were born from parents in a society. You learn to speak. We saw these arguments with Rousseau before. He's just right. There are no just abstract individuals that fell from the sky and did this. So this liberal vision of how society happens simply is wrong, he says. Also, he says this idea that humans should just follow their self-interest. This is useless. This is useless to the history of the world. It is useless to the development of the world spirit. History, the world, is not about realizing your random desires. It's not about doing backflips out in the desert, or because a lot of your desires are horrible, right? You might have a crush on a girl. Your desire would then be to, if you can't get her, to violate her. That's not a good thing, right? If you just follow your desires, a lot of bad things would happen. But that's not what history is about. That's not what ethics is about. Ethics is about participation. It's about contribution. And he says it has to be like that. Because if we were truly these self-driven individuals, we would have never gotten out of this state of nature. We would have never built civilization. The civilization is built on sacrifice. Civilization is built, wars are won by armies, not just doing what they want, but by armies being disciplined and sacrificing themselves for their country, right? It's about, you would have all just stayed in bed this morning if you were just following self-interest, right? That's not what civilization is made of. Civilization is made, we didn't achieve very much just from following our desires and our self-interest. We achieve things by being inspired to contribute, to sacrifice, to do things for humanity, for our family, for our community, for whatever it is, for our God. But it was driven by ideas, not by instinct. Right. And last thing, and here is truly original. Let me take a second and read some of the things you said. Very interesting things you're saying. Well, Fernanda, Hegel is not judging people, right? He's just kind of explaining what matters. So yeah, you're not going to heaven, right? You're not earning. It's not like you need to pass a certain threshold. It's just you. It's about what part of you goes on. Francisco says, okay, it follows different paths. Hegel agrees with you, right? So the spirits are national, are within a single civilization, and there are different ideas, and you need different ideas, actually. because we need this agreement for this dialectic to work. So people don't need to think the same thing. You need to think different things. It is through the interaction of ideas that civilization grows. So it's not about people being on a different path. I'm not wrong, but you say, okay, we have different paths, uncivilized. That is true. If you see it this way, you kind of think of history in stages, right? If you see it as an evolutionary progress, and then people who are not European, they can look primitive compared to the main civilization. That is true. And we're going to see some consequences of that when we get to fascism. Back to my slide. The third reason why Hegel argues against individual freedom is that he thinks that's not actually what people really want. He says these liberals, they're confused. The real need of people is identity. Most of all, what people don't want freedom. You think they do, but they don't. If you really wanted to be free, you would be living in the mountains, doing backflips, running parkour, yelling, right? There you could be free. Really, freedom would mean being left alone. Nobody, well, not nobody, but most people don't choose that path. They choose to live with other people, right? And they choose to live with other people because what we really want is to belong. What we really want, what would make you really happy, is to feel like you're in a place where you're needed, where you're useful, and where people respect you, right? Where people recognize you. That over there, that's Francisco. He's a great guy. You know, he's doing all these things. You know, we are proud to have him. That's what you really want, right? You want to identify with something. You want to belong and be respected and to participate. And I think Hegel is spot on there, right? That's a very important human desire. And so in a way, he's anticipating identity politics 200 years before it started, right? He's anticipating the role of identity, which would become very important, right? Things like class consciousness with the communists, or like national identity with the fascists, or today, gender identity and all these things, right? So he says, more than freedom, it's about identity. But still, let's talk a bit about this freedom, right? Now we get to probably the most unique part of this lecture. It's Hegel's stance on freedom. It's going to be weird, but rewarding to understand what I'm going to say. So his stance on freedom is very weird. It's paradoxical. He says, freedom is not doing whatever you desire, but understanding what you must do. That is probably the opposite. If I asked you before the slide, what is freedom? You've probably answered the opposite. You'd have said, well, you're free if you can do what you want. And, you know, when you're not forced to do things. That's a good liberal definition of freedom. But Hegel says the opposite. He says freedom is not doing what you want. Matter of fact, freedom is understanding what you have to do, why you have to do certain things. How can we explain this paradox, right? Because apparently freedom is not doing what you want. That's weird. Let's start with a thought experiment. Let's say, Mr. Abel, let's say that I'm a heroin addict, you know, and since I'm, you know, addicted, and it's been, you know, it's getting hot in here. It's been a few weeks since, you know, since I had that, and you know, I'm kind of out of money, Abel, and I really need it. Okay, so if you want, you can maybe give me like 200 pesos. You know, I really need it. All right, I'll do anything. You get 100. Okay, if you want it. So because you know, I need that. Did I look particularly free to you in my little sketch I did? Would you say that I, on the brink of just selling out, am very free as an addict, wholly consumed by my desires? What do you say, Abel? Did I look particularly free to you? Or did I look fully free?
And no, you don't. You're not free. You are being. You are following your desire at that particular moment, because you're a slave to the drug, to the heroin. So you're not making rational decisions.
Okay. But here a weird thing happened, right? So Abel says I'm not free. I think most of you would agree with him. Yet I'm doing exactly what I want. What I want is heroin. What I'm doing is getting it 24/7. I'm doing when I wake up, what I want is heroin. What I'm doing is getting heroin. So I'm doing what I want 100%. I do nothing else. I neglect my children. I sold them for heroin. So apparently there's a difference between doing what you want and being free, right? As we just demonstrated. And the reason for this, Hegel explains this, is that, also as Abel explained, a lot of things that we want, we didn't actually choose. It sounds like madness because you think you choose what you want, but that's not true. A lot of things that you want, that you desire, you never chose. They just came to you. A lot of your desires are random. You all will be able to think of a memory of childhood or something you wanted as a kid. If you think now back of it, you're like, oh my God, that's so shameful that I wanted to be like that person or do that or have this thing. Right? I remember I wanted to have a monster truck when I was a kid. When I think back of that, I'm like, oh my God, how knuckle of me that I wanted a monster truck. Right? I didn't understand the ecological footprint in it. I didn't understand machismo. I didn't understand any of these things. I'm like, why did I ever want that? And it goes with a lot of things like that. To give you another example, food. I am of the strong belief that all people can eat and enjoy any type of food if they would just try so. But you don't. There's a lot of things you don't like, right? And some of those things are weird. Like you have certain adults that don't eat tomatoes or they don't want to eat cheese. And people who do eat cheese are like, but why? Cheese is great, right? Now, what probably happened, if you don't eat cheese, what probably happened is that when you were a kid, you choked on cheese. Or you had to throw up after eating cheese. But it's before you were conscious, like when you were 2, this happened. And so it's stored in your memory that cheese is bad. But you don't remember this particular event, right? You just remember you don't like cheese or that you don't like tomatoes. So here you are 10 years later at the dinner table with your future parents-in-law, the parents of your smoking hot partner, and they're serving entomatadas. And they serve you and you're like, I don't eat tomatoes. And everybody looks at you weird and they're like, why? And you're like, I just don't, right? You're not being free. You're being a loser at that point. And it's because, sorry if you don't eat tomatoes, it's because you are controlled by desires that you never even chose. Like you don't actually know why you don't eat tomatoes or you don't eat cheese. You just know that you don't do that, right? You're limiting your own freedom by things you don't even understand. And that's a lot of our things like your favorite color. There's a lot of things about you, about your personality, that if you think about it, you think, why do I actually like this? You have no answer to that. And that's because a lot of those things are manipulated, right? A lot of your thoughts you have because other people instilled them in you, and you kind of forgot that other people planted that in you as a child, and now you have them. And once I questioned them, you're like, well, why did I actually ever believe that, right? Because we are manipulated. One of the clearest manipulations that we have, right, or by drugs, whatever, is commercial manipulation. Hegel is the very first critic in history of consumerism. Hegel, I think, is about perfume that his tyrants are. He's like, nobody needed perfume the day before it was invented, right? People apparently were okay, and now suddenly everybody feels naked when they're not wearing perfume. This is weird. One of the big tricks of capitalism is that it makes you believe you have a need that you didn't have before you knew about the solution. You've all went through this, that you saw something and you're like, oh my God, I absolutely need that. Except that you didn't know that existed 1 minute before, right? So it cannot literally be true that you needed it. The market is full of these things. It's all kind of nonsense that you buy that you don't actually need, and you don't even know why. Like a week ago you didn't need it, and now you're convinced that you just must have it. To give one absurd example of this, I like to give my example of the man purse. You know what a man purse is, right? This kind of bag that man, like a purse for women, but then for men. 10 years ago, nobody was having a man purse, and I hope today not too many people either. But let's say we're 10 years in the future, right? So imagine, guys, 10 years from now, you're shaving, you're ready, you put on your best shirt, you're ready to go out. You're gonna do it. You call your buddies, you're gonna go. You run towards the door, you grab your car keys, you're out of the door, you're in the parking lot, and suddenly it hits you. You forgot your man purse. Damn, I have to go back inside, right? So you run back inside, lightning strikes, the spirit of Hegel bursts out and slaps you in the face. It's like, bitch, talk about no man purse. 10 years ago, you were okay, go to the club without a man purse. You just put stuff in your pockets, right? Well, why are you now going back into the house? Because, oh no, I need this. This is some nonsense, right? So a lot of the things, my point is, a lot of the things we desire, we never chose. Either because we're manipulated by chemical things like addictions, or because they're from our youth and we don't remember, or other people installed it in it, or marketing plays tricks on us. So if you just follow what you desire, you're not actually free, because your desires are partly external. You're not rationally choosing it. Real freedom, so in a sense, my friend Takashi, right, is not that free. He's just following his impulses. And one day that will lead to him getting killed. And he could stop all of this by reflecting on his life, but he won't. So real freedom, Hegel says, real freedom, students, starts with self-consciousness. Real freedom starts with the awareness of where my desires come from. The awareness made me and what conditions the way I think, right? It's being self-conscious of what conditions are trying to determine me. So to be free really means to be free from desire. It's to be conscious. It's the Stoic freedom. And that we can do through using reason, through analyzing our desires. Now, what's the consequences? Why do I go on this long rant? There's consequence for politics. Here we get, so what I told you before, I think makes a lot of sense. Now we get into some deeper water, right? Hegel is here going a bit off-road. He's going to formulate freedom as duty. If we are free from our own desires, right, and we're not acting anymore just on impulses, or we are acting on impulses, but at least we understand why we're doing that, right? Certain impulses make sense. We have to orient ourselves to something else, right? We have to choose to follow certain motives. Now, where can we find these motives? Well, Hegel says we can find them, of course, in contributing to the spirit. We can find them in service to the community and to the state. They're like, whoa, 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 freedom is service to the state? Yes, it is, but under very specific circumstances. There's a big if here. If society is organized according to reason, the spirit of the time. If society is organized in a way that makes sense to you, right? If you think about your path in life, and you think about the institutions, and you're like, yes, this is, this makes sense to me. That's true. And it gives a maximum. And your reason will find its match in it, right? The way society is set up makes sense to you, so it makes sense that you contribute to this, right? It will seem rational to you that you have to contribute. that you have to work, that you have to fulfill certain duties, it's going to make sense to you why you have to do certain things. Because you understand the logic of the duty, right? You understand why you have to pay taxes, because you understand what taxes do for society. Therefore, you're not going to complain and bitch about having to pay taxes. That again is if society is organized according to reason, right? If you learn that the former Secretary of Defense is currently on trial for 4 counts of narco trafficking, then you're like, yeah, maybe the army doesn't make too sense. Maybe I don't want to join the army either, right? Maybe you're not going to be too patriotic about taking up your military duty if the whole system is not actually protecting people, right? But if it is, then we can understand why we need to do things. So freedom, here Hegel is really twisting the word freedom, right? We have to point that out. It's very paradoxical what he's saying. Freedom really is becoming conscious of why you need to do your duty. Once you understand why you need to do things, they're going to come natural to you. You're going to feel free. You're not going to feel them as a burden. They're going to make sense to you. And that's going to lead you towards happiness. Happiness, Hegel says, happiness is the consciousness of a share of socially valuable work. Happiness is being aware that what you're doing is useful and appreciated. Happiness is finding a role in life where you feel like you're useful, where you feel like what you're doing is valuable and that you're rewarded for it. If you can get in a position like that, you'll probably be happy, right? So me, for example, I'm a very grumpy person, as I said. I'm also not very concerned with happiness. I'm more of a stoic. I don't spend much time or money in making myself happy, but I spend a lot of time working. And that means that I spend a lot of time trying to do socially valuable work, and that means that my happiness is kind of tied up to how well that is going. That is why it truly depresses me whenever I see graduate students of mine that are doing horribly stupid things, right? I teach in 9th semester. I teach a lot of, right? I'm in contact with a lot of ex-students, and whenever they say something incredibly stupid, like the poor are poor because they want to, I'm like, oh my God, you learned nothing. 5 years that I've been teaching you, and this is the crap you're telling about politics, right? I go actually depressed when I see my ex-student say stupid things about politics, because it means that my work kind of was useless. So a real happiness is if you find yourself a position in life where you belong, where you feel like you're making a difference. And I think that's what we as a generation, well, I'm millennial, your generation Z, but what we share is that we want to contribute, right? We share, like, we want to make a difference in the world. And if we could achieve that, and it's very hard, we would be happy. The problem is that depends on a social system that creates opportunities for us to find a position, which we don't exactly have. We work on these 1 or 2 year contracts, most of us, right? And it's not very clear exactly what our work is leading to. But this is only possible within a social system. And that system is, of course, going to limit your liberty, going to give you a certain amount of options of what you can do. But at the same time, it's going to create the conditions for dignity, right? For you to feel respected for what you do. This to me is a super interesting idea, the last part of it. We're going to see how different societies do this, especially when we get to communism. Communism is a very original take on this, on making people feel like they're being useful. But that's for later. So freedom is duty. Kind of weird, right? But there's some beauty in this idea. So for that, we need a society. We need a state. So Hegel's concept on political freedom is very different from any other person we saw so far, right? It's very different from a liberal concept of freedom, and actually requires not the absence of a strong state, it requires a strong state. It requires organization. It requires a lot of society, right?
this freedom is not us being alone in the desert. No, it's us living deeply in a community. So what the state needs to do is to organize things in a way that makes sense to us, right? That we understand why we have to do what we have to do. For that, the state needs to embody the spirit, the absolute spirit, the ideas of the time, what we are thinking. If the state can do that, if the laws are in accordance with what we think is right, then life is going to make sense to us. So for Hegel, the state is not the means but the end, right? The state is always trying to become more perfect in reflecting civilization, in reflecting culture. And that's the goal of things, right? The better culture, the better state. And the state then allows the citizens to realize their lives, etc. So the state is not just a thing in the background that's there to guarantee your rights. The state is there to actively try to constantly change and try to reflect the spirit. Now, the state doesn't do this alone, right? The state is not just the government, it's any public actor. It's anything in civil society, because there's many ideas that must be realized, not just political ones, right? You also have cultural ideas, you have physical ideas, like sportsmanship, etc. So it's sports, it's church, religious ideas, it's companies, etc. The state is important to him, but not just the state, right? Remember, he's living in Germany. He wants this unification, right? So to have a functional society, we need a lot of communities, all trying to be their best selves, all trying to contribute to the whole, to be holistic. So ideally, they all function in pursuit of some kind of overarching national project that makes sense to all of them, and that is going to be a happy community. So in exchange for this, in exchange of everybody contributing, right, the state needs to create the conditions in which this civil society and the individuals in it can flourish. The state must provide the people with the things they need. The state needs to provide rights. The state needs to deliver, same as Rousseau there. Now we're going to start slowly retreating from Hegel's ideas, because his views on politics, let's get to, so how should the state look like? In short, Hegel said something very conservative. He wanted a constitutional monarchy, but it doesn't matter what he says. Why? Because there's a lot of historical debate about if Hegel was serious about any of this. Because Hegel, at the point when he was writing this, he was working under supervision of the King of Prussia. And this was in times after the French Revolution. So he was very scared of saying something that would get him executed by the king, right? So what he's saying is basically he's praising the king. If you would ask him, what should we do? He said, oh, we should have a constitutional monarchy, particularly of this guy. He's great, and we should have a national project with a lot of national unity, right? And we should not have democracy. This should be organized by a bureaucracy, by the smartest people, and they're going to realize, the spirit and create laws, etc. But none of this sounds like anything he says before, right? His whole theory is about change. Everything he says about change, and then you ask him what should we do, he's like, oh, things are fine the way they are. Doesn't really make much sense. A lot of people think Hegel wrote this because he was a coward, basically, because he didn't want to provoke the king, right? He said, the real truth is in my theory of change, right? That should give you a clue what we should be doing, not me answering the question in class of what should we do, right? Because I'm kind of nervous about that. So what Hegel said about politics is of no relevance. Also, he was not influential in his time. While he was alive, nobody was listening to him. His real importance is on his influence later on his influence on nationalism. This idea of national unity, and us united by culture, that's going to evolve. Partly into fascism, but also his influence on the left, on Marx. Marx was a student of Hegel, not physically, like he was not in Hegel's classroom, but he was the generation after that. So they were still teaching, let's say, Hegel's course
back then. So Marx was influenced by Hegel, and Marx was actually very influential in his lifetime on the world. So that's the real relevance of Hegel. Now, to summarize all of this in a quote that I posted earlier, to literally synthesize everything I've said, we can come to José Martí, the Caribbean revolutionary. José Martí said, let me drink. A true man does not seek the path where advantage lies, but rather the path where duty lies. And this is the only practical man whose dreams of today will be the law of tomorrow, because he who has looked back at the upheavals of history has seen civilizations go up in flames, crying out in bloody struggle throughout the centuries, knows that, without a single exception, the future lies on the sides of duty. Couldn't be more Hegelian. All right, dear students, after this most confusing lecture, what are your questions and what are your thoughts?
Well, I actually like Hegel's thinking or thought because it really it shows something that makes sense. Yes, history. I like the thought that history it's made by the changes in the ideas of people. Like I see it right now with the generational or generation change. I don't know how to call it, but like how we went from, for example, with the case of the student that was mistreated during class, that how we went from teachers hidden students because they thought it was right to teachers not being able to mistreat their students during the class, well, inside the classroom because it goes against the principles or the moral values that we should have inside the classroom, and because it slander no it doesn't slander it makes it difficult for the student to learn. I don't know, that's kind of interesting.
Okay, it's nice that inspires you. I will notice that. So I'm giving you the best Hegel, right? I'm giving you as good as I can explain him. If you would read him yourself, you'd be like, "Oh my God, this makes no sense." So I'm making him look good. But I'm happy. I'm happy that inspires you, Miss Astrid. What do you think? Or do you have questions for me?
Yes. Do you know where did he meet Marx?
What?
Do you know where or when did Hegel meet Marx?
They didn't meet. So Hegel was dead already. Marx went to the same went to university where they were teaching Hegel's discourse. He never met him. So Hegel, while he was alive, nobody really cared about him. But afterwards, his students were like, "Man, there's some deep stuff. We should we should make a course about this." And Marx took that course. So they didn't interact directly. But Marx was so Hegel inspired a bunch of people, and Marx met those people. And he studied him. That's my understanding of it. And I know that's a disappointing answer, but that's, I think, the truth. Are you disappointed, Miss Astrid?
Yes, a little bit, but that's okay.
I'm
Disappointment
sorry.
is part of life.
Yes. Charlie. Any other questions? I guess not. So, dear students, Miss Susanna has, I think, a question. Not really. Okay. What's next? Normally would be Marx, because he's literally the next guy.
Except we're not going to do that because I want to start my lecture on Marx on a Tuesday. My lecture on Marx is quite important to understand this course, and I don't want to split it into two parts. So for the next two classes, I'm going to use some filler, and I'm going to talk about feminism. Feminism is a class from much later that I'm pulling towards the past. I'm pulling it from the future because it's kind of timeless, right? I was going to teach feminism at the end, but I could as well teach it here because feminism starts also in this period. So my next two classes, Thursday and Monday, are going to be about feminism, just because I want to start with Marx on Tuesday again. So we're going to break a bit the order of the course, but I don't want to break up my class. So that's why we are doing that. If you're free, can do it to contribution become a desire. So it's not, it's free from desires. It's just the way I want to explain it. It's about understanding your desires, right? It's understanding why you want things. That is freedom. So yeah, your contribution that is a desire too, but at least you know why you want it. It's not instilled by some trauma that happened to you as a kid, or you were not manipulated into it. You know why you have to do what you're doing. Therefore, you know, you're in charge. So did you raise your hand again?
Yes, I was going backwards with the notes, and the first slide you mentioned that Hegel, I'm sorry, studied theology, and within the slide as freedom as duty. No, that wasn't the one. The state, where he mentioned that the state doesn't act alone, and church, sport, clubs, everything helps to make society function. But I was thinking, I'm not sure, and I want you to confirm that he would believe that religion is not as important as long as you contribute to society. Is that what he believes?
Yes, but religion wants you to do that, right? If you remember from reading the Bible, Christ is quite explicit in that you have to do things, right? Faith without works is dead. Christ is kind of all about you forgetting about norms and just acting and doing right. So Hegel thinks that religion is very important. He thinks that Christianity made a major contribution to world history by installing this idea of equality of your souls, right? That we are all children of God. That's a big revolution in thinking. Because before that, we were all seeing each other as different animals and everybody else is inferior and only my own tribe is good. So he thinks religion is actually really important. Although I think he was a Protestant, not a Catholic. So he also has his dialectic of religion, right? And then Christianity, Catholicism corrupts, and then the reaction to that is the Reformation, and he has his own theory there. But he thinks religion is important. I don't know if I'm answering your question. Kind of cut off track there.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so that's what we are going to do. Ms. Regina. Ms. Silva.
Hi. Yes, I'm sorry, my mic.
See? Do you want to say something?
Yes, I'm sorry, my mic didn't turn on. I just wanted to say that I really liked his his thought on our contributions to society, because I think that it is very cool to think that some part of us or some of our ideas or contributions will stay in a period of time with society, although it may be not in the whole world, but in a small amount of people, and I think that's really beautiful.
Well, that's my reading of it. That's more what I'm reading into what he's saying, right? But yeah, that's cool.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. What if you did always thought to benefit him? I don't understand it. But anyway, so next time we're talking about feminism. After that, Marx. I'm also going to give you new homework, by the way. I'm going to upload that right now. You're going to read the Communist Manifesto of Marx, but I'll explain that in writing. All right, our time is up. Let me take attendance. And then, dear students, you are free not to follow your desires, but to follow your duty. That means go to your next class. See you later.
Thank you, teacher. Have a good day.
Have a great day too.
Thank you,
Bye.
teacher. See you next time.
Bye.